Hello, welcome to video number 3 in our series of training videos covering KYHMIS and how to use it. In this video, we're going to cover the Release of Information tab as well as how to do service transactions. You'll see I've got everything set up how I did on the last video. I'm looking at Fred Flintstone, client number 285. I'm still shadowed as a user here. My enter data as selection is still chosen as the Kentucky Housing Corporation dummy project. And I'm still backdated to 12/1/2012. This is basically going to be the date at which this household enters into our program. So in the last video, we got them entered into the system, and we got them set up in a household, this couple with no children, with Fred and Wilma. We got the head of household established, etc. So now it's time to move on to the next tab in that left to right workflow here, which is the ROI tab for the release of information. Now, whenever a client comes in and you're getting their information, you're getting them set up, you need to have them sign a release of information. And this needs to get added into Service Point. Now, it used to be the case that an ROI was valid for 7 years, but that recently changed last year. And now the requirement is that an ROI is not to be valid for more than 365 days. Okay? No more than a year. Now, we do suggest that if you have a client that's staying in a program for a shorter amount of time, maybe 6 months, 30 days, what have you, we suggest that you make your ROI valid for that period of time. 30 days, 60 days, what have you. So in this case, we're going to set them up with an ROI. We're going to make it valid for 1 year. I'm looking at Fred's record. Now I'm going to click the Add Release of Information button. Now, there is a difference in how you can put this information or this release of information in, which is different than the way you do it on your paper copies. In the paper copies, you should have the all adults in the household sign a different ROI. They should have their own ROI separately. But any minors that may be in the household under the age of 18, they need to get applied to the head of household's ROI. Okay, now it doesn't need to be put in that way in the system. If you did it that way, then I would have to do one for Fred, save it, and then I would have to switch over to Wilma and add one for her as well to keep them separate. But it doesn't need to be done that way. We used to train on it that way, but we don't do that anymore. So I'm looking at Fred's record. I'm going to click Add Release of Information. So I'm going to apply this same ROI to both of them. Remember, it needs to be different in the paper copies. I can either click Wilma's name here, or I can choose the whole household and it will select everyone that's in the household. You'll see that there is a check mark already checked in Fred's box and it's grayed out, so I can't uncheck it. The reason that is because I'm already looking at Fred's record and I clicked Add Release of Information on his record, so it knows from that I want to add one for him at the very least. But this is going to be for both of them. It selects my provider as whatever I have set for that enter data as selection, which in this case is the Kentucky Housing Corporation dummy project. Release granted, that refers to did they allow for their information to be shared or not. More on this in a moment, but please keep in mind that when you select no, if they actually decline an ROI, selecting no here does not lock down their information so that other providers and other users in KYHMIS can see it. It's still open, and it needs to be locked down by a system administrator, or if this is something that comes up often in your program, then we can actually train you on how to change the visibility settings yourself. So the start date automatically is populated from whatever we have our back date set to, so in this case it's 12/1/2012. So remember, we're keeping this open for a year in this case, so I'm going to set the end date to 12/1/2013. Documentation, what this refers to is, do you have a signed statement from the client in which they decide to release and share everything? Do you have a signed statement where they decided not to release and share everything? And the third one refers to call centers in Louisville that have to get this information over the phone. Okay, this verbal consent. So I'm selecting option 1. I have a signed statement from the client in which they decide to release and share everything. And witness will just be your initials, whoever witnessed them signing the release of information. It's not necessary, but it's very good practice to do so. And then I'll hit Save Release of Information, and it populates here. Now you'll also see this binder clip to the right. I can click on this and I can actually scan in and attach their ROI that they actually signed. Very handy in order to keep everything in one place. I can also go back and edit this release of information. If I add new members to the household later and need to add them onto this, I can click this Include Additional Household Members button right here, and I could check them on the list here. I can also print the release of information, and I can delete it if I made a mistake. Okay? Now you'll see I'm on Fred's record, so if I switch to Wilma, Wilma is now showing that she has a signed ROI as well. I'm switching back to my head of household. You'll see here that this release of information section at the top says ends 12/1/2013. So this keeps you on track with your ROI, and you can click this date anytime to go straight into that valid ROI. That really covers everything with the release of information for right now. So let's go into the service transactions and talk about those. So I'll click the Service Transactions tab. So you'll see this brings up a selection of different options that we can choose from. You can also do referrals from here as well. But we're going to click on Add Service for this. Now again, we have that same type of checkbox system here where we basically just choose who this applies to. So I'm going to select everybody for this. Provider, once again, is automatically selected to our Enter Data As selection. The start and end date and time automatically populate, but there's one important thing to note about this, and that is that the end date and start date and time need to be different. They can be the same day, but it just needs to be a different time. So let's say, for example, if you're doing something for the client that doesn't really have a specific time frame on it, maybe you just provide them with utility assistance. So all you really need to do for that is, you can change this start date and end date. They can stay the same. But you can change the end time here to maybe 8:01. Okay, just something to indicate a different time frame. Okay. Now what I'm going to say for this though, if you look at service type, this is what type of service that you actually provided for them. So in this drop down, I've got a few selections. In the live site, most providers will have a more full list that has a lot more options in here, depending on what your agency actually provides. But I'm going to say case and care management. Now what I'm saying with this is I'm referring to this service as the meeting that I've had with these clients at the very beginning to talk to them about what they need, to start getting them into the program, etc. I'm considering that my case management meeting with them. So let's say that this went from maybe 10 in the morning until 11:30. So I'll set my end time to 11:30, my start time to 10 a.m. There's nothing in this next drop-down box, so you don't need to worry about this. I can hit save and continue, and it will take me to the screen where I can add more information about my services. Now here, you can add in service notes, which is always good practice to do. So I can say, met with clients to discuss program entry, something like that, just whatever it is that describes the situation. You can associate costs with it if there is specific cost information. And in this section, you can actually add a funding source. So if you have a certain grant that pays for whatever service you provided for them, you can select that here using these green plus signs. Okay, you can actually choose specific grants. And then you can add in how much you actually provided. You can attach support documentation using the same system that we've seen throughout Service Point so far, in which you would browse throughout your system and choose a file. You can put a description and select upload. You can add information about a follow-up. If you need to follow up with them at a certain date and time, you can put in a projected follow-up date. And you can even select a certain provider area for that. Granted, it will default to whatever your Enter Data As option is selected as. You can check whether or not the follow-up was made later on when you actually do the follow-up, and what date you completed it. Now, one of the most important sections of this window here is this need information box at the bottom. Now, whenever you create a service, the system automatically generates a need as well. It's basically saying, since you provided a service to somebody, they must have needed that service to be done. Okay? So need status here refers to what's being done with the service. Okay? Closed means that it's finished. There's nothing else left to do with it. You've got everything done. Whether or not you actually were able to provide the service, this just means that there's nothing left to do. Okay? Identified means that you've identified the fact that they need this service, but maybe you haven't gotten around to it yet. Okay? Or maybe you're waiting on something to open up. And in progress means exactly what it sounds. It sounds like you have started providing the service, and maybe there's just something holding you up to where you have to wait and close it out later. An outcome of need, fully met, means you were able to fully provide the service they needed. Not met, maybe you weren't able to. Partially met, maybe you were able to do some of the things they needed, but not all. And service pending is, again, that situation in which you're maybe waiting for something to open up. This next question, you only need to answer if the outcome of need is select as not met. And this has things like maybe all services were full, maybe the client wasn't eligible, or maybe they actually refused, or maybe your agency doesn't provide this service, or they weren't able to access the service. So in this situation, if we're saying that we're taking on a case and care management meeting with them, then we have provided this to them, and we don't have to do anything else. So we would mark this as closed and fully met in this case. Okay, both of these questions must be answered. So when I hit save and exit, it'll take me back to the services tab under service transactions, and you'll see the service right here. But if I click on entire service history, you can see this need that the system automatically generated. Okay, so I have my service here for case and care management on 12/1/2012 under my dummy project area, and then the need gets associated with the same details, but this is where the need status and outcome are associated. Okay? So you select client information to get back to your main screen here. And this is really all you need to know when covering ROIs and services. Now, some things are a little different when it comes to services for programs specifically like HOCWA, but this training is only meant to cover the basic HUD standard of doing things in Service Point related to services and ROIs. So we're not going to cover that today. But that's basically everything there is to know. Please look out for the next training video, and I hope you found this useful. Thank you very much.